In Psalm 64, David makes a familiar request. Listen to how he starts in verse 1. Hear my voice, O God, in my complaint, preserve my life from the dread of the enemy. David is praying here for personal protection. Hide me, he says in verse 2, hide me from the secret plots of the wicked. He knows that his enemies are formidable. They make secret plans to accomplish evil purposes, drawing from the depths of their arsenal of injustice. We learn from verses 2 and 5 and 6. David's enemies are vicious, bold, persistent, and confident. We learn from these early verses, Psalm 64. What do you do in David's position? What do you do when people gossip about you to try to make you look dumb or incompetent? Or when people spread rumors about you to try to get you fired from your job, or to discredit you in any way? Do you try to get revenge using the same weapons of the flesh that your opponents used against you? Or, like David, do you cry out to the Lord, seeking His help and His justice? Well, how we respond in crises of personal attack depends on how we understand the Lord, what we think about the Lord, what we believe God to be. David knew that the Lord loves justice and hates robbery and wrong, as Isaiah would later write in Isaiah 61, verse 8. In God's system of justice, wickedness is like cancer. It ultimately destroys itself. Listen to how David describes that in verse 8. The wicked are brought to ruin with their own tongues turned against them. So David brought to the great judge this complaint, as he identifies it in the first verse. It's a sort of legal brief, a sort of legal petition, knowing that God alone could grant the justice that he sought. So David is crying out to the Lord for personal protection, but David isn't thinking only about himself. Psalm 64 isn't a diary entry. It's a public notice for those on both sides of vicious plots. God's intervention, David wants everyone to know, against injustice produces two things. First of all, it produces fear, as David describes in verses 8 and 9. When wicked people fall, all who see them will wag their head. Verse 8. So it's a sort of public notice for those who witness injustice of the same kind that they're committing themselves. Moses prophesied in the book of Exodus that the downfall of Pharaoh would cause fear and dread to fall on God's other enemies, Exodus 15, 14 through 16. So the failure of wicked plans should cause all of us to ponder what God has done, lest the same thing happen to us. That's what David says in verse 9. But God's intervention against injustice also produces rejoicing for those who entrust themselves to God, though they are victims of injustice, knowing that the judge of all the earth will do right. We sing like this in Psalm 9, Thou, Lord, art a refuge for all the oppressed. All trust Thee who know Thee, and trusting are blessed. For those who trust the Lord, the true justice that He gives is a reason for rejoicing. Let's listen now to Psalm 64. To the choir master, a psalm of David. Hear my voice, O God, in my complaint. Preserve my life from the dread of the enemy. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the throng of evildoers, who whet their tongues like swords, who aim bitter words like arrows, shooting from ambush at the blameless, shooting at him suddenly and without fear. They hold fast to their evil purpose. They talk of laying snares secretly, thinking, who can see them? They search out injustice, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search. For the inward mind and heart of a man are deep, but God shoots His arrows at them. They are wounded suddenly. They are brought to ruin with their own tongues turned against them. All who see them will wag their heads. Then all mankind fears. They tell what God has brought about and ponder what he has done. Let the righteous one rejoice in the Lord and take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart rejoice.